Following the positive response to my video about the United States motto, I feel like I should go a bit further with the topic with an aspect that I feel impacts a greater number of people much more in their daily life, with millions of school children being exposed to it daily. What I'm referring to is a change that came alongside the change in the United States motto, that being in addition to the Pledge of Allegiance. I assume that most of my audience is familiar with the current Pledge of Allegiance in the United States, but for those of you who are not, I've provided it on screen here. What many people may not be as familiar with are the different iterations that the pledge has gone through since its inception in 1892. That's what we'll be focusing on today, walking through the changes in the pledge over the past 126 years that it's existed. What you see on screen here is the very first version of the pledge, created in 1892, and as you can see, it's much shorter than you're likely used to. I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I think the most important point to be made with this version is the very strict, concise message. The message being, I pledge my allegiance to my country which stands indivisible with liberty and justice for all. It's important to note the very concise message outlined here, mainly due to the fact that despite there being three versions between the original and the pledge that we have today, the message stays remarkably consistent all the way until our current version established in 1954. So let's look at the versions in between. The first change came in the same year that the original version was proposed and made an exceptionally small change, in fact only adding 2 letters. Instead of my flag and the republic, it was changed to my flag and to the republic. This change is remarkably small and as such makes no change at all to the message of the pledge. This version remained in use from 1892 until 1923. In 1923, 2 more small changes were made, changing my flag to the flag and adding of the United States afterward. This change yet again made no change at all to the central message of the pledge as it had previously existed. Nor did the change that came into effect the next year in 1924, adding of America to the end of the United States. These changes were made during this time with immigrants in mind. It was a way of specifying allegiance to the United States for immigrants rather than their own country of origin. This version lasted for another 30 years before the pledge was yet again edited in 1954. What you see here on screen is the Pledge of Allegiance that you're likely familiar with. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The changes being an arbitrary capitalization of the word nation and the insertion of 2 words, under God, with a capital G nonetheless. This change was officially implemented by somebody who you should be familiar with after my video about the national motto, that being President Dwight D. Eisenhower. So in a country where the majority of citizens do identify as some denomination or another of Christianity, many would be quick to dismiss any problem with the 1954 changes as simply being representative of the general beliefs of most Americans, especially in the time of 1954. However, while it is true that the majority of Americans are Christian, almost 25% of the American population is non-religious, and by interjecting the phrase under God into the pledge, that nearly 25% of the population is essentially declassified as true Americans, according to the very words deemed appropriate to pledge one's allegiance to the country where they reside. On top of this disregard for the non-religious population living in the United States, this change also, much like the current United States motto, disregards the very strict, purposeful separation of church and state as provided by the founders of our country, blurring lines that must be kept clear and strict in order to protect the future of religious freedom within the United States. And finally, if you're still not convinced that the 1952 change of the United States Pledge of Allegiance is a negative one in terms of representing the very consistent message that had been upheld by the pledge before this change, we need to only look at whether this addition changed anything significant within the message presented. As you will recall, this is something that did not change significantly throughout every previous iteration of the pledge itself from 1892 to 1952. The consistent message contained within the wording of the pledge was, I pledge my allegiance to my country in which I live, which stands indivisible with liberty and justice for all. I wish it were more difficult to criticize and that this explanation needed to be even slightly more nuanced to come across as intended, but all I really have to do is ask you to check the placement of under God's addition. What once read, one nation indivisible, has now been both figuratively and literally divided by the very phrase that was added in, thus changing the meaning significantly. Following the 1952 change, the pledge no longer speaks of a nation that is indivisible, but rather of a nation that has been very blatantly divided by those who would prefer to see the end of religious freedom in the United States. preferring to replace it with a pseudo-theocracy where citizens are welcome to practice their religions in the privacy of their own homes, but can still be governed according to the edicts passed down from Bronze Age savages in the Middle East upwards of 2,000 years ago simply because the majority of Americans recognize the sanctity of said laws. And yet, despite this edition flying in the face of American religious freedom and blatantly disregarding the lack of religious beliefs held by nearly a quarter of the nation's citizens, this edition has stood largely unopposed for 64 years now, a time period that is twice as long as the next longest period between pledge alterations. I highly doubt that I'll ever live to see a change in the Pledge of Allegiance that removes this ridiculous edition. However, I know for sure that I won't unless we, as a unified non-religious body, fight against the injustice that this edition poses to all of us. While many people, myself included, silently protest this edition by simply omitting the phrase, "under God," from our own personal reciting of the pledge, no actual change will ever come to fruition without vocal opposition. With that being said, I would urge all of you to take the information in this video, add to it with research of your own, and bring this topic up more. Learn the reasons why this injustice should be reversed, and do not idly sit by as many people, myself also included, have done for too long. Chances are, nothing will change, but wherever there's religious injustice, atheists are often the front line combating it, and this situation should be no different. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and a comment down below giving me your opinion on the matter. Check out the link in the description to my public Discord server where you can chat directly with me and other members of our community, and as always, have a blessed day, fellow heathens.